Hello and welcome. We're here today to present the new Youth Substance Use Prevention Program that Ipswich Aware is currently rolling out with our schools and throughout our town. I'm Dr. Stephen Barrett, and I practiced family medicine for over 40 years in Manchester across Cape Ann. And after retirement, we moved to Ipswich because it's a wonderful town. Incidentally, my grandchildren live here too. I'm joined by Dr. Carl Soderlund, who raised his family and practiced primary care internal medicine right here in Ipswich for 40 years. He probably took care of many of you watching our program today. And we also have a number of Ipswich parents in the studio today to help us. What is Ipswich Aware? We're a volunteer coalition of citizens, schools, YMCA, police department, Board of Health, library, churches, and mental health providers formed to help our community deal with mental health and substance use disorders. Our goals are education, support, reducing stigma, and prevention. Today's program is all about prevention. We're very grateful to ICAM for their guidance in producing this program, as well as their ongoing help in broadcasting our program messages to the Ipswich community throughout the year.
Not a day goes by that we're not aware nationally, regionally, or locally of some type of opiate death, whether it's some rock idol or someone we know in town. As I spoke to a woman here this evening, she knows of 2 people in her neighborhood in Ipswich. So we're not far from concerns of substance abuse. And our concern is really the skyrocketing incidence of mental health problems, substance use, alcohol use, and serious, even fatal overdoses that are happening all around us, especially since the pandemic. Our school counselors and teachers, medical physicians, mental health providers, we're all overwhelmed trying to identify and deal with these issues. So we think it's time to focus the community and focus ourselves and our parents on involvement and try to figure out a way of helping prevent these problems from happening long before they're a crisis. Here are some facts to demonstrate the problem. Alcohol continues to be the most widely used substance among America's youth, with an estimated 6 million adolescents between the ages of 12 and 20 having consumed alcohol in the last month. 6 million in the last month. And we'll talk more why that's so important. Also, the use of marijuana has increased dramatically among our adolescents as well. An estimated 1 million adolescents, 1 million between the ages of 12 and 17, used marijuana for the first time in 2020. 1 million in that year, which figures out to be 2,700 adolescents per day using marijuana for the first time. Alcohol and other drug use among youth is in particular concern because of the effects of the developing young brain and can permanently alter brain structure. A little science. Our brains don't completely develop until our early 20s. So an adolescent brain is a whole bag of connections. We spend our adolescent years remodeling, developing, and all parts of the brain don't develop at the same time. There are parts of the brain that develop earlier, and in teens it's thought to be the area of the brain that allows them to take risks. The part of the brain that gives us our intelligence says don't take that risk doesn't develop until later. So kids are particularly prone to taking a risk, such as using substances that if their brain had developed further, they might not do otherwise. Of concern, however, is the developing brain and the effects of alcohol and drugs. Why Ipswich kids? It's a little hard to see on that slide, but the graph shows Massachusetts deaths from overdose. From the year 2000 on the left, there were about 300. You can't see that well, but in the far right, 2020, over 2,000. So that's an increase in deaths over 20 years from opiate use. Deadly fentanyl is showing up more and more in illicit drugs around the country and even in our area, while prescription drug abuse is still a serious issue. In 2020, the CDC reported a 64.1% rise in suicide deaths. That's got to make you think about some 64.1% rise in suicide deaths for persons ages 10 to 24. That's frightening. Throughout the pandemic, so the last 2 years, the CDC had found significant anxiety and depression among our teens 26 to 30% of households have some identifiable degree of anxiety and depression. It was a tough time for the past 2 years for all of us, teens and adults alike. Our Ipswich kids are not immune to this. We as parents are not immune to this, and it's really got our attention. Some more facts, and this will be important to think about. Among people 12 or older in 2020, 58.7% used tobacco, alcohol, or an illicit drug in the past month. Now, if you start using a substance in your early ages, you're much more likely to have problems going forward as to not using it at all. Second point there is alcohol and other drug use during the teen years can interfere with normal brain development, as we were just describing, and increase the risk of developing a use disorder. And I thought these are fairly new terms. I think many of us grew up with the word alcoholism or just drug use or drug abuse. And alcohol use disorder is a term that's now used much more prevalently. And I just looked in Wikipedia and the definition of that, so we all know the same. Chronic or habitual consumption of alcohol to the extent it injures a person's health or interferes with their social or emotional function, and they lose power of self-control. So they really, and many of you may know people who have had alcoholism in the past, and they do lose power of self-control. Substance abuse disorder is very similar. It's chronic and habitual consumption or ingestion of controlled substances or inhalation of toxic vapors, such that the same things happen. Just so we know what substance we're including, marijuana is considered a substance, even though it's legal. Illicit drugs, prescription drug misuse, cigarettes, and even vapor. Nicotine affects the developing brain. What's in vaporing affects the developing brain. This is, to me, is such an important concept. If you damage that developing brain, it doesn't develop normally, and we end up with all kinds of problems going forward. Lastly, injury and violence related to drug use is one of the leading causes of death for teenagers. The Center for Disease Control tracks causes of death by age and by gender. When you're young, you don't tend to die of disease. You used to tend to die of car accidents, and that doesn't happen quite so much anymore. And now violence is a leading cause of that. This is important, we mentioned a little bit. 40% of children who began drinking before the age of 14 develop an alcohol use disorder at some point in their lives. Half of them. They began drinking. They didn't begin drinking too much, how many, but they began drinking. So we can draw conclusions of how much they're drinking, but that's a very important concept. If you look at children who did not start drinking, 9% of youth who do not drink alcohol before the age of 21 develop an alcohol use disorder. So very unlikely, and it seems logical when you see that slide, but when you really see it in print, it's striking. Now, some other interesting facts during the pandemic. Alcohol sales in stores went up 21% during the first 7 weeks of lockdown. We can all think of what we did those first 7 weeks. We were home, we were locked down, and we ordered it online. And the concern when we ordered online, an investigation in California found that oftentimes alcohol delivered to homes was actually being delivered to people under the age of 21. I don't know how they did that, but they were delivered to people under the age of 21. This is also striking. U.S. retail marijuana sales rose 46% in 2020, that year of the pandemic, and are expected to reach $37 billion in 2014. A big industry. Now let's look at why our children may start drinking, and they may be the same reasons adults start drinking. Stress. Now we all think of stress in ourselves, we think of stress in our children. When children worry about things such as grades, physical appearance, and fitting in, and I'm sure as parents we all have lived with our children those concerns, they may drink or use drugs to try to scrape these problems. Sounds familiar even in adults. Peer pressure. So the peak of peer pressure are between the ages of 11 and 18, and that's when a youth is most likely to really give in to peer pressure. Give in to peer pressure and start drinking in those ages. We just looked at slides that showed the consequences of that, which is of concern. And then transitions, life events, such as transitioning to high school or college, breakups of relationships, moving, parents' relationships, parents' divorce, all these can influence adolescents' use of drugs or alcohol. So I think this is a good time to stop for a minute and introduce our panel, and Steve and I are very thankful for you to come and participate. What we'll ask our panel to do is introduce themselves. You might tell us how many children you have and maybe their ages, and then we're going to pose some questions and see what your thoughts are. So we'll start on my far left.
Michelle Rendazzo and Adam Rendazzo. We have 3 kids, 2 12-year-old in 7th grade and a 3-year-old.
I'm Reverend Adam Rendazzo. As she said, those are my kids.
I'm Mariah Corso. I have an 11-year-old and an 8-year-old.
I'm Mallory Buff. I have a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old.
Great.
I'm Robert O'Connell. I have a 20-year-old, 17-year-old, and a 16-year-old.
Rich Schofield. I have 3 children, 2 girls, 9 and 12, and a 13-year-old boy.
I'm Corey Clark. This is my husband Jared. We have a total of 5 kids. We have 3 in the elementary school and 2 in the middle school.
I'm Jared Clark, and what she said.
Hello, I'm Corrine Howland. I have 4 children, 2 girls, 2 boys. My girls are 25 and 19, and my boys are 10 and 11, and they've either gone through the Ipswich school system or are currently in the school system now.
Hi, I'm Kristen Prescott. I have 3 boys, 7, 10, and 12. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Jill Johnston. I have 3 children. I have 2 boys, ages 26 and 25, along with a 12-year-old daughter that's in the Ipswich Middle School right now.
Well, I think our Ipswich youth are well represented, and thank you for coming. So we had a slide up there with the questions, but so that we can see you with the camera as we ask these questions, I'll ask them and give some thought, and if we don't have specific answers, we'll move to the next question, or if you have something you'd like to say, just let us know. So how concerned are you today about mental health and substance issues of your children? Either before you came in today or after we've raised some of these facts.
I've always been concerned. One of the toughest funerals I ever did was for an overdose. And the first thing I did is came back, and at that time she was only 4, and said, honey, we got to talk about this. And how do you talk to a 4-year-old about drugs? And her response was classic in her terminology. She said, I'll run into the house and hide under the bed if anybody offers me that. And at that time I was like, okay. But now that they're getting older and this is getting more accessible in the schools and whatnot, I don't know how to talk to them. And I'm scared. So I try to just be honest with them and say, hey, it's not good stuff, and if you have questions, talk to us about it.
Anybody else have any thoughts to add to that question? It's really moving. Personal experience. Yes?
I work in education with teenagers and younger folks as well, and see the effects of the lockdown in particular, and anxiety and depression levels in my own family. So it's something that we discuss openly, and as well as issues related to substance abuse, and communication really is the key. Don't have all the answers, but certainly there to listen.
Yes.
So I overheard my sons talking to their friends one day about a year and a half ago, and they were saying that somebody in their grade, and it was only 5th grade at the time, got caught with selling vape pens. And I said, my mind just spiraled. I'm like, okay, vape and selling at 5th grade? I was just shocked. So, you know, we had a conversation, and I know this with my kiddos, you know, they were not as attentive in my conversation as I had wished, but, you know, just getting the simple no, it's not okay to them, because it was over their head. They didn't quite understand it, but so hopefully, you know, they took the word no away from that at this point.
Mm-hmm.
How did you feel when you tried to have that conversation? Did you feel overwhelmed? Did you feel knowledgeable? Were you comfortable?
Overwhelmed, and I'm pretty comfortable speaking with my kids on sensitive subjects that might, you know, feel a little awkward. But it just caught me completely off guard, and I had that feeling of that physical reaction of anxiety when you get your face red, and I was just so anxious about it. It was difficult.
Can almost bring on a panic attack. I mean,
Yeah.
you could just
Yeah.
think about what's happening. Anybody else have any thoughts? Yes.
One thing I think I've noticed in our household is we have 2 kids that are in 8th grade and sort of hanging out with high schoolers and middle schoolers is how much social media is affecting them. It's sort of like a different animal than we used to teach a long time ago. Don't do drugs, have the DARE programs. But now kids are just on their phones constantly getting all that information. So I have to say, normally I'm pretty negative about social media and the amount of time that the kids will spend on it. But I'll have to say, from hearing all the middle schoolers, there's a couple, I'm not sure their names, but like famous YouTubers or TikTokers who are really promoting being against drugs and not doing drugs, and the merchandise is against drugs. And I actually feel like that's a little bit of a helpful thing in terms of now, because they're watching these kids and they're saying, wow, like these kids are making millions of dollars. They think they're really cool and they're against drugs. So maybe social media can help us a little bit with this.
Anything else, anyone?
I just want to jump in. I am hearing some themes here. One, the anxiety involved in all this because of the uncertainty in parenting. Number two, the fact that it's right here in Ipswich, and I think that that's something that you all seem to appreciate, I hope is more widely appreciated throughout the community, because without recognizing it, we can't do anything about it. Three, I think when you listen to some of the things our program offers, you will find that we will address some of the concerns you have. Nothing's going to be perfect, but ways to help. And four, you, especially Corey, what you just brought up, one of the more powerful ways that I think we can work, and we haven't really figured it out, and it isn't part of the scope of this presentation, is how to harness the kids to help each other behave in ways that are healthier and make good judgments. So we'll be exploring a lot of this some more, and those are excellent points that I think deserve attention.
Now, we hope the program is going to help answer this question, but where would you turn prior to listening to us today for help in dealing with stress or emotional problems or substance use questions with your children? What would you have, hopefully we're going to answer that by the end of the day, but where would you turn?
Social worker, therapist.
Social worker at school?
No, well, before I feel like we were I was in a transition before we'd moved here, which I've gotten so much support from being here. But no, in the pandemic, I got my daughter a social worker to support, and it's been super helpful.
Was that hard to find?
It actually fell right into place, and it was actually pretty convenient because it was online.
So, I mean, they really are trained to deal with stress and preventatively even in an early stage. Any other places? Yes, Brett?
A lot of people call me. Believe it or not, I have a couple young couples that said, hey Adam, how do I deal with my kid found pot? I said, well, let's talk about it. And I usually sit down with the child as well, with the parents, and we discuss the pros, cons, what they've heard about it. And then normally I'm like, well, we got to go talk to a doctor or talk to a nurse. And my wife's an RN, so I can always ask questions there. And oftentimes send them off to a social worker or a therapist if it's beyond my purview of things. But I do get a lot of questions about this, particularly from the youth themselves. Because I have a nice rapport with them, they can come to me and talk when they don't want to talk to their parents.
Is there a youth group in your church?
There is.
I've reached out to my girlfriends. Sometimes I've talked to my older girls on things, say, hey, how should I approach this with the younger kids,
I actually do something similar because my boys are older. So there's a 14-year age gap when my daughter is going through something difficult where she's asking questions about drugs, about, hey, same thing with the vaping issue, came to my house too. I said, actually called up her brother. I said, hey, what do you and your friends think? So because his friends have all watched my daughter grow up being such a big age gap, they are actually a big help for her. So she was able to contact her brother, his friends, who kind of became big brothers and sisters to her. So sometimes kids don't want to listen to adults, but put them with like a 25-year-old or a 22-year-old that they think is cool, they'll listen a little bit more. That's what I realized from my daughter.
And you had
That
something?
is true. I think we need to also remember we should contact our primary care.
Yeah.
I think that's, and sometimes being in a, yeah, Dr. Sutherland, being in a small town, you know, we know our physician or they know someone related, and that stigma, you don't want to, you know, bring the problem, but I think we need to break that and create a safe place that you can ask for help. Your primary care is the right person to go. You know, most clinics have social worker, and I know right now, you know, some of us are in the healthcare. It is really hard to find a therapist or someone that you can, you know, fit with your family and the child, but just starting that conversation with the primary care is so important.
I'm glad you brought that up because probably 15 years ago, I think we piloted a project with Beverly Hospital, adding mental health to our practice here in Ipswich. That evolved into really the state, when Leahy and Beth Israel combined, the state mandated that model be brought to all of our primary care practices. We all recognize how important it is to have mental health as part of our primary care team, and hopefully that's something that happens. Yes?
I think speaking to that, one of the things I've run into is that no counselors or therapists are taking new, especially when you're saying pediatric. You know, I have a 7 and a 5-year-old. And during the pandemic, I reached out to the pediatrician, got a list, and called, and they weren't even doing wait lists at that point. And I was kind of like, okay, surely there are kids who are worse off. Like, I was kind of being proactive with it, and like he was having a little bit of a hard time not going to preschool and the routine. But it was kind of like a dead end in terms of the counseling route when I attempted.
Let me just jump in a sec. That is a big part of why we're doing this program, because the needs, as Carl has described, far exceed the capacity of the professionals who deal with this to keep up with it, whether it's through the schools or through the medical offices, and they're more oriented toward the more severe cases. And so we at Ipswich Aware thought, well, what if we try to do something to prevent the problems before they occur? And that is the core strategy here and the rationale for it, that we hope will really augment and take some of the pressure off down the road, the professionals, because they're not going to suddenly appear. The system is what it is. It's tight to get in and see somebody.
So this question may be unfair to this group because obviously you're very involved or you wouldn't be here and very concerned. But I guess the question would be, how prepared do you feel, or do you think your friends feel, to talk with their children about underage drinking and other substance use? That's why I sort of broaden it to not just you, because you've expressed some pretty good ideas so far. Yes?
I feel solid in my ability to talk to my kids, and even, you know, my friends' kids, if they come to me or if I overhear something. It's those, as I mentioned in my last comment, you know, it's those unexpected moments where they catch you and you're not prepared to talk about it. That's what gets me anxious. And I think too, the trends of drug and alcohol use change, right? You know, edibles were a big thing, and now vaping, I think, is the cool thing now. So just kind of keeping up with, you know, what the kids are being exposed to, and the names for everything is can be a little challenging.
I know I found, as a naive physician, I didn't even know the terminology.
Yeah.
And how do you keep up as parents with what the kids are saying?
It changes all the time.
You don't.
Yeah.
We are really fortunate, though, to have, you know, the police officers that work with our kids in the school and the community. I think we have a great bunch of officers here in Ipswich who are invested in the safety of our kids and the education piece too, not just you know, catching them in the act of something, right? You know, they're invested in the prevention and treatment and those conversations, and they're really into that relationship building with our kiddos, which, you know, at the end of the day, that's gonna be a key factor as they get older too, you know?
So when your kids leave home in the morning, do you feel they're safe?
No, never.
Definitely not.
Nope.
What things do you worry about?
Everything.
I think peer pressure.
That's a big one for me too.
Peer pressure,
Like-
especially with middle schoolers.
Mhm.
And they are going through such a weird stage right now because they don't know who they are, and some do know, and they're very strong in their core beliefs. And then they get, oh, you're too pushy, or you're such a leader. And I think the new generation, they are very open, and kids don't want to upset their friends by saying no. But we are very lucky that our kids, they know who they are, and they're okay saying no, but they come home and say, my friend doesn't know how to say no.
And they tell us all about it.
Right.
And we are so lucky that our
So it's
our
really
girls will
hard
tell us
to,
everything.
I think peer pressure is that big thing, like to fit in.
Do you think being a tough parent is tough?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I don't know. I feel like if your kids are communicating so well, and I feel really lucky to have that with my 11 more than the little guy. I think it's important, and there's a lot of value in that, because the control just is not going to work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right.
It's how you define tough parenting.
Being a parent is tough.
Right. No,
But being I'll leave the word tough, because as you can interpret it as you want. I think you were gonna.
I feel that being a parent that sets boundaries, and tough boundaries and hard boundaries on your children, and then because you have some parents like us that we will tell if our children ask us something, we're going to tell them the truth. You have the other parents, or tell them the consequences goes with it. It's tough with the peer pressure where you have the other kids that aren't learning that. So on my end, my daughter thinks I'm the most horrible person in the world.
Then you're probably a good
Because
parent.
I won't let her on Snapchat, or hang, and I watch, monitor everything that she does. I'm that helicopter parent, but in some way, having two older boys that I was helicopter parent for, they're good kids. I have them to speak for my parenting, but to be a parent in this age, when you're that hard parent, oh no, we're like the devil, excuse me, Reverend Adam.
So they're good and healthy kids. That's the important part.
Yeah.
And being a parent is tough. I hate to give stories, but I always do. So when I was growing up, my parents were strict, and I probably resented it. But my best friend, his father was the chief of police. And so when I was in high school, if we were going to go do something, my best friend's father, the chief of police, would say, "Can Carl's mother and father let him go?" And if they said yes, then it was okay for him to go. Those are tough parents. But it's tough to be a parent. But I think it also gives the kids a fallback on peer pressure. I feel the pressure, but my folks won't let me do it. And they're out of it a little bit.
But going with what Jill was saying, some parents aren't educating their kids or having the tough talks. And then it falls on the child to make the decisions.
Do you find that when you're being a strong parent for your children, that you're also helping be a strong parent for their friends?
I hope so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yep.
I'm a big believer of open communication. Listen to what they say and take it in, validate what they're saying. It's okay to make mistakes, but it's okay to learn too.
Right. That's a great conversation. Anybody else have anything to add before we move on? And yes.
One of my biggest fears is accidental, ingestion of like a gummy or a edible or something. The kids over at someone's house thinking, it's a regular cookie, right? And then next thing you know, they've,
Right.
So that's like one of my biggest fears. And then too, just kind of piggybacking off of what you were saying, Jill. Yes, having those, those hard boundaries in place and rules, but also having those conversations. So if or when they do something, they'll call you, "Mom, pick me up. I drank, I had one of my kids say, Mom, I tried X, Y, and Z. It's not going so well, I need help. It's like, okay, all right, I'm glad you called me. We'll talk about this in a day or so, let's get you in the right frame of mind right now. So
That's
yeah.
terrific. Anything else? We'll have a chance to have some more questions towards the end, but this has been wonderful.
Yeah, I think as we go through our description of our program, we're going to address a number of the things that you all just brought up, and it was a wonderful tie-in and hopefully demonstrate the value of this program. So let's look at the details of our Ipswich Aware Youth Substance Use Prevention Program. And the goal is to help parents communicate, something you all were talking about, more effectively with their children, and to support their mental health and encourage good decision making, and hopefully to prevent significant problems from substance use as we do that. This is Talk They Hear You. And we're using multiple outlets in the Ipswich community to present the Talk They Hear You program designed by the federal government Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration. We know from research studies that effective communication with parents is one of the most powerful factors to guide children and prevent substance use. This program offers parents suggestions and examples of just how to do this, and we'll be discussing them here. For our program in Ipswich, we'll also draw on other resources such as the Partnership to End Addiction, the CDC, the Massachusetts Department of Public Health, the American Academy of Pediatrics, and the DEA to offer information and guidance for parents. Links to these references can be found on our website, but are not part of our discussion today. We'll also be presenting speakers and seminars on the subject in the future. For now, let's review the tools and points available for parents through the Talk They Hear You program. Here's a surprise. Scientific research shows that young people really do listen to what their parents have to say about alcohol and other drug use. Contrary to the way it may seem, approximately 80% of children believe their parents should have a say in whether they drink alcohol, but talking about it can be difficult. So start talking with your child early and often. It's never too early to talk to your child about alcohol and other drugs. But start these talks with children before they're exposed. Have frequent little talks instead of one big talk, which might be our tendency. Talk, get it over with. But make it a subject of frequent conversation. Be direct and honest in your conversations. If you don't know something, say, let's find out. But your child will be more likely to respect your rules and advice about substance use if you are honest. It's also never too late to have conversations with your child about alcohol or other drugs. If you're thinking, gee, they're no longer 9, I missed the boat, oh well. No, jump right in. Treat your child like a partner in the conversation and try to imagine how they feel. You'll communicate much more effectively, and that will help them really hear what you have to say. 5 conversation goals. And this is the part of our discussion with the most important guidelines of how to talk with your children about substance use. Research suggests that one of the most important factors in healthy child development is a strong, open relationship with a parent. It's important to start talking with your children about alcohol and other drugs before they're exposed to them as early as 9 years old. So use these 5 conversation goals to help you get started. But remember to keep it low key. So conversation goal number 1, show you disapprove of underage drinking and other drug use. As you've heard, over 80% of young people ages 10 to 18 say their parents have an impact on their decision whether to drink. So don't assume you know how they feel about drinking and using drugs. Send a clear and strong message that you disapprove of underage drinking and other drug use. Conversation goal number 2, show you care about your children's health, wellness, and success. Young people are more likely to listen when they know you're on their side. Remind your children why you don't want them to drink or use other drugs. because you want them to be happy and safe. The conversation will go a lot better if you're open and show your concern for their well-being. Conversation goal number 3. Show you're a good source of information about alcohol and other drugs. You want your child to make informed decisions about alcohol and other drugs with reliable information about their risks and dangers. You don't want him or her to learn about substance use from bad sources of information. So get the facts. You can find them through our program materials. Make sure your kids know you are a trustworthy source of information. Conversation goal number 4. Show you're paying attention and will try to keep them from drinking and using drugs. This is the balance between being a helicopter parent and being a concerned, involved parent. So think of how you behaved when you were growing up. Young people are more likely to drink alcohol or use other drugs if they think no one will notice. Show that you're aware of what your child is up to, but do this in a subtle way and try not to pry. If you ask about friends and plans, make it because you care, not because you're judging or criticizing, and then your kids will be more likely to talk with you openly. In conversation goal number 5, build your children's skills and strategies for avoiding alcohol and other drugs. Even if you think your children don't want to drink alcohol or try drugs, pressure from their friends can make it hard for them to say no. Help them have a plan to avoid underage drinking and other drug use, and that can help them make better choices. Talk with your children about what they would do if faced with a decision about alcohol or other drugs in different settings. While they're in a safe environment, practice saying no thanks with them in whatever way feels most comfortable to them. Keep it low key, and give them an escape route if needed. A promise that someone will come get them right away and not judge them if they feel uncomfortable or in danger. Preparing for these talks. Decide when and where to talk with your child about alcohol and other drugs. Consider using everyday opportunities to talk, in the car, during dinner, or while you and your child are watching TV. Remember that having lots of little talks takes the pressure off needing to say everything in one long discussion, and your child will be less likely to tune you out. That's a lot to take in. Fortunately, there's lots of campaign resources for parents to help you prepare. Our school superintendent, Dr. Blake, will be sending you tips and reminders about talking with your kids about alcohol and other substances attached to his weekly emails. The Talk They Hear You website also has fact sheets and articles for parents. There are brochures to find advice about talking to kids and specific drugs and situations in many locations around town, including the library, the Board of Health, medical offices, the YMCA, and churches. In addition, you can find extra helpful information from the mobile app and podcast. We shall be saying more about these momentarily. Our Ipswich Aware website has links to all these, and there is also helpful input from other respected sources under the Parent Reference section too. We'll also be having presentations and book discussions on related topics throughout the year. Answering your child's tough questions. Why are alcohol and other drugs bad for me? We suggest that you stay objective and tell your kids that science has shown that alcohol and other drugs are bad for their growing brain, hinder full development, and can make them sick in other ways. Keep to the facts that we know. That should be enough. Scare tactics rarely work, especially because adolescents tend to feel invulnerable, but they will listen to facts and learn to make up their own minds. I got invited to a party. Can I go? A common conundrum. You want your kids to have fun and have good relationships with their peers, but you also want them to be safe. It's a matter of having them take responsibility while also keeping a certain level of supervision and safety net. Ask your child if an adult will be present at the party or if he or she thinks children will be drinking or using drugs. Reach out and coordinate with other parents, especially the hosts. Remind your children of the rules around alcohol and other drugs and behavior you expect. And remember to offer a safe, non-judgmental escape route. What if my friends ask me to drink or use other drugs? Helping your child say no to peer pressure is one of the most important things you can do as a parent. Work with them to think of ways that they can handle different situations as a teenager. And practice these different ways of saying this until you find the one or ones that work for your child. Like, it's just not my thing, or I don't want it to interfere with my athletics. There are many. Did you drink or use drugs when you were a kid? This is the one that makes parents cringe. It can be hard to argue, do as I say, not as I did. And it's especially hard if parents are currently regular consumers of alcohol or other drugs. Modeling responsible use of alcohol and other drugs is certainly a powerful influence on children's behavior choices. And this is where parents need to take a good look at themselves. Again, bottom line, the best approach is honesty and objectivity. Make sure to emphasize that we now know even more about the proven risk to children who drink or use other drugs. Continuing the talks. So you've had that first conversation with your child, and well done. But now what? Frequent conversations with your child about alcohol and other drugs keep the lines of communication open. Remember that children can't learn all they need to know from a single chat, so keep talking. As children get older, the conversation changes. Make sure that the information you give your children is age appropriate. Think about what they need to know about health risks, managing situations, and staying safe. As they get older, you can give them more information and remind them of your agreements.
We do have up both the website for Ipswich Aware as well as the website for SAMHSA, which is the government site. There are multiple tools that are available. We'll make all of these program materials available in printed form at the Ipswich Library, at Town Hall. Our school superintendent, Dr. Blake, as Steve mentioned, will be attaching tips and reminders about the program to his weekly emails to parents. You'll also be able to find printed program information at the Y, many of the churches, medical offices, and other places in town. Important that this is all of this material, everything we've said today is on that website for SAMHSA. And it is an excellent, just a wealth of information. To support parents even more, Talk They Hear program has developed an app for your phone. If you go to the App Store and type in Talk, They Hear You, you'll quickly pop up. It's not the first thing, it's the second thing. Again, I don't know who paid for the first thing that pops up, so make sure you look, and it is Talk. But you'll get an app on your phone, and it's fascinating. It looks just like that, and it's on my phone, and the first thing it says to you is, any time is a good time to talk with your kids about underage drinking and other drugs. Learn how to turn everyday situations into opportunities to talk. Get informed, be prepared, and take action by practicing. Well, you scroll down on this app, and it gives you situations. The big sleepover, dinner time, a break from homework, in the car. While you have their attention, bring up things that can be hard to talk about, like underage drinking and other drugs. The screen that you see on the left, and it says equip yourself. Well, it's very interesting. The first thing you can click on is a conversation starter, and it gives you tips on how to start this conversation. And let's click on that. It says, and this is in quotes, I want to talk to you about the neighborhood party this weekend. There will be alcohol there, but as a reminder, alcohol is for adults only. And so those are conversation starters. What your kids might say, and boy, I found these are, if alcohol's so bad, why do you drink? And that gives you some answers back. Did you drink as a kid? And talks about moving on. And actually it then moves down that you can actually click on and you can practice. So you can sit and then hear it back, and there's some critiquing. So this is a wonderful tool to kind of help get the conversation started in the car, talking sports, making lunch, before the big party, after school, when you're concerned, while they're growing up. So this is free, and I found it's very useful. So let's talk.
So we're nearing the end of our presentation part, and I just want to say, as much as it's delightful, parenting is often difficult. Mental health and substance use are complicated issues. Preventing serious problems doesn't happen overnight, and these skills required to parent effectively are learned through experience. They can also be taught. It takes time, commitment, and practice. And we like our program, Talk They Hear You, because it provides us with a great outline for this. So in that light, This will be an ongoing program throughout the year and then year to year. We will expect to have more meetings, hopefully in person, to discuss communication strategies with kids and maybe other ways to support them. We'll offer speakers on the subject and books to read for those who want to delve deeper into the subject. Most of all, we want to reinforce the sense of caring, support, and healthy lifestyle in our Ipswich community in a way that benefits our kids and protects their future and ours. And at this point, we have a short video produced by the Talk They Hear You program that we can listen to that will give you a minute to think about our message.
If you talk and they will hear you. We all want our kids to grow up safe and healthy, so we show them how. And we tell them with honest conversations that let them know what we expect. Not just one time, but every chance we get. That's especially important when it comes to alcohol and other drugs. Kids not only need to know the dangers and how to avoid them, they need to hear it often from you. And when it comes to pain medications, opioids, they need to know that they should never be taken without a prescription and never shared with friends or family. It's dangerous and illegal. So talk with your kids and guide them through the challenges of growing up safe and healthy. Because when you talk, they hear you. For more information about talking with your kids about underage use of alcohol and other drugs, visit underagedrinking.samhsa.gov. So talk, they hear you. You can do it if you try.
Now that we've reviewed our concerns, that Ipswich is not immune from these kinds of problems, that many of you are facing tough parent questions, and hopefully what we've done is given you some tools and some reasons to open this conversation up. Let's sort of think about a few more questions now that you've heard what Steve and I had to say. So, same format as last time. I'll ask a question and then we'll see what your thoughts are. Based on what you've seen so far, do you think you'll try or use the Talk They Hear You website or other materials to help with the conversations of underage drinking and other drug use with your kids? Do you think this has been helpful? Do you think this program is helpful?
Yeah.
Lots of head nodding.
Yeah, I think the app is really, really cool. And as I was listening to you, like asking the questions, I'm curious, like, does it give you support with answering them?
Yes.
As well?
Yes. As I looked at this, obviously coming out of 2 years of the pandemic, and when the word government is mentioned with science and other things, it just kind of makes people get nervous. I will just tell you that the National Institute of Mental Health is an outstanding organization. They fund most of our mental health research, and so in spite of what we heard a lot about with government and science this past few years with COVID, this resource is unbelievable. There really is a lot of concern and a lot of practical tips, I think, for doing that. Do you find any obstacles that might prevent you from using these tools?
Maybe time.
Time.
Maybe, your erratic nature of life, you're always busy type thing.
Right.
It's about making time to do this on a regular basis.
Do you think you have the time with your kids?
Could try and find it.
Well, I think that's one of the things the program does, is it gives you examples, like when you're riding in the car to practice with kids who play sports, to just bring some of this up and start establishing some communication around these issues to show that they're important and that you care, and that you have, some guidance to offer them that they, believe it or not, will listen to.
And I think you've hit it right on the head. Big periods of time are tough. Little periods of time here and there, different things going on in the day, picking them up from school, if they do that, do whatever. You take these opportunities to have small and frequent discussions, really letting them know you care, letting them know why, and letting them know you are watching, because we are. Is there any way, as you think about this, how we might make this program and this approach even more attractive to parents and useful to people in Ipswich? How can we move forward? Yes?
Well, you said at the very beginning why you moved to Ipswich, of the community. And I couldn't help but think while we're going through this, that's one of our strengths. And even though as a parent we tend to think of things as a very singular, us as parents keeping on our children, the reality is there's a whole network of parents, a whole network of teachers. So introducing yourself to the parents of friends and things like that, that helps us keep an awareness about what's going on and get ahead of any kind of problem that might happen. So I was thinking that's something which after this I think I'm going to put some extra work into.
As they say, it takes a village, and we're in a very good village to be.
Rich, thank you for that comment. I could not have said it better. I mean, that is the whole underpinning of this program. As I said, I think that we need to almost make it part of the culture. And we have a small town where people care, but we need to kind of actively work to take advantage of that and build the network even more.
I think it would be wonderful if Ipswich every once in a while could have a meeting where parents could attend with their children and do maybe in an auditorium. I feel like when we were younger, DARE was a lot bigger or more around a lot more. I feel like my kids talk about, we had a small talk about here, but then we don't hear about it for a long time. I think if we could all sit down in a setting like this, but with our kids, it would maybe open it up that, we're here together, we're hearing this. If we could have, people come in that have had experience with this kind of stuff. I think from growing up as a kid, when we had parents come in and talk about tragedies of losing their kids or people that have had to deal with substance abuse, I feel like you remember those always. And if our kids could have a little bit of that with their parents there and be able to talk to them after, it would give it more of an opportunity to, okay, we have a night together. This talk is happening this night. Let's all go. Let's do it as a family.
That would be a perfect activity for us to put on. So I'm going to try to remember that and get back to you and use your help in putting something like that together, at least find out more what you're after. I'm sorry?
Was it the Heron Project? I know he spoke a few years back. Yes, yeah. Chris Heron.
Oh, okay, right,
he
the
was
basketball player?
Yeah, Celtics, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, he spoke a few years back here in town, and it was very, yeah.
Karen, I think you were trying to get
I
something.
just, you know what, to piggyback on what Corey said, it also helps to remove some of the stigma around, the substance abuse piece, but also mental health piece, so that maybe it's, a little easier to talk about for a kid to come to their parent, or vice versa. When it's kind of just thrown out there, here it is, let's talk about it. Big group of people, their friends may be there, maybe they're not, whatever. But when you're around your peers and the adults in their life, and they get a chance to have people talk to them and then throw their stuff out there, it just removes a little bit of the tuck it under the pillow attitude that has been slowly changing over the years, but it's still out there. And we keep hearing, even in Ipswich, we're no different than anywhere else. And as parents, if we think we are, that's the beginning of the problem anyway. So that's all.
Yep, well, I think parents can do something about that by having the conversation, by making it a topic that isn't kind of somehow so forbidden that we can't even talk about it, or so scary we can't even talk about it. So have these conversations, and then maybe it'll help break down some of those walls.
I heard time, and I think it would be kind of cool to have an accountability just with different parents. Like, how many conversations do you want to have, like a week or month or whatever, and have like a group to support each other in that. That's just what came up for me.
Kind of like counting steps.
It's like I just know accountability is like really important, and like sometimes people lose sight of why it matters in life, and so I think it just could be something cool.
Yeah, these are good ideas.
I remember I think it was in high school, we took a field trip to the jail, and it was like a scared straight sort of a field trip. Like, not that we were bad kids, it was just, and it really sunk in with like a lot of us. So I don't know if they do that now in the high school, just listening to the people talk and tell their stories. That's really effective, I think, personally.
It's interesting that the research about sort of the negative side of it, Scared Straight, is mixed. And by and large, a positive approach in building relationships and opening channels of communication has, in the end, been more effective for more people. However, I think you're right that some people who may be kind of just ripe for that because they're kind of just trying to decide could respond to that. So nothing's off the table here.
And I feel like if we could have those big things where there's lots of kids in the setting, it's sort of like if you've ever talked to a kid and you're like, do you have any questions? And they never have a question. It's like crickets. And then have you ever sat in on a health class where kids can put like, you know, questions in anonymously and they read them? The kids have hundreds of questions and all of a sudden, like if one kid's asking, it's okay for all the other kids to ask. So I think being able to give those kids the opportunity to ask those kind of questions with their parents nearby, but maybe it's not that one-on-one, it's not, you know, they just it gives them a different chance to kind of talk to each other, talk with parents and help. And I think a lot of kids also would attend, and I think we have to remember about kids whose parents are maybe struggling with substance abuse, and there are a lot of kids whose parents are, and those kids don't know where to turn, and they have questions, and they can't talk to their parents. So I think reaching out to those kids too is also important.
And I don't want to lose sight, the brains of these adolescents really aren't developed enough to really comprehend all of what we're saying. And I think frequent small conversations go a lot further than one in-depth conversation that they really don't process. They're risk takers. They're not, as one article I read, CEOs. They're risk takers, and it takes a while for that to sink in. So these frequent small talks, and we hope we're having frequent small talks about all kinds of things. And this is just one of those many things that you try to find time when your kids are saying, sure, Dad, yeah, right, that's around here, and they're gone. But it's in the car, yes.
One thing I found relevant, to just make it more relevant to my children, is around sports. So they play a ton of sports. And my son, for example, you know, you talked about a Celtics player coming in. There's no one who's going to listen to more than a Celtics player, right? And if I phrase it in terms of, look, if you go out and do these things, you're never going to be a good player. It's going to hold you back from being this fantastic player you could be in the future. That really resonates with him because he understands that. He understands that kind of impact it might have on him.
There's actually Massachusetts interscholastic rules that if kids are caught using substances, they're disqualified from participation. So a dedicated athlete is taking a super big chance by getting involved in alcohol and other substances, if they really wanted to do that.
I do think, like, thinking about the group setting with kids and parents, or however it might look, showing some of the statistics up there with like the people shaded in for even just the mental health piece. You know, I think giving kids the perspective of look around who's around you, 9 of those people, or whatever the percentage is, are dealing with mental health right now. And it kind of gives them just as much as you can for a younger kid. It takes them out of their own head about themselves and like a sense of empathy, I guess, or realizing I'm not alone when you look around.
Right. We're actually trying to institute some programs within the school to have some peer-to-peer mental health support offered, but that's the job too. It's not part of this program. Why don't we move on a little bit? Okay. And I just want to tell you and really emphasize that the Youth Substance Use Prevention Program has another whole arm with equal importance, in my view. And that is, we want the town to develop as many positive activities for youth to engage in throughout the year as possible, as an alternative to getting involved in drugs, alcohol, or any other self-destructive kind of activity. And of course, these could be in the realm of sports, arts, supervised excursions, volunteering. So we're actively trying to develop those things, we're working with, trying to get in touch with various youth leadership groups to find out exactly what they would find most interesting and helpful. Working with the YMCA, the town recreation department, the police department, the Regional Youth Prevention Network, which is a very excellent organization, and church youth groups, all of which can have significant impact in this area, because we want to create and coordinate a bunch of activities for youth throughout the year. And we're going to keep a listing of those activities on our website and update that throughout the year. And we're also going to invite town businesses and organizations to help out and create more youth opportunities to get involved. Because we really believe that community service and helping others can help build responsibility and self-esteem and a strong sense of belonging that can be protective, especially towards our goal of substance use and just mental health.
You know, one of the things I was thinking as you were saying this, and I found it last night, there are things around, it's trying to find out where they are. I got on the Ipswich Library website last night, which is a beautiful website, and there is a graphic novel book group for teens. There's a 6th grade, there are like 7 or 8 monthly book groups for teens. Who would have known? I mean, but they're there, and I think if we can publicize these things and get kids interested in things that are outside the peer pressure, and there are other sports venues and arts, et cetera. So,
just shows you once again the contact points, the SAMHSA website, and our website. We're soliciting volunteers and donations to support our program, but mostly we want people to get involved and active with their kids. That's the end of our presentation. We know how challenging parenting can be and how important effective parenting will be to keep our kids safe during these days. So remember, for more details, visit the Ipswich Aware website and the Talk They Hear You website. I want to thank Dr. Soderlund for sharing his insights and passion about raising kids safely in Ipswich. I want to thank our panel for their participation and shared wisdom, and our viewers for tuning in to learn about the Ipswich Aware Youth Substance Use Prevention Program. Let's all keep talking and staying closely involved with our kids and keep them safe and healthy, and have a nice night.